Sir, if you
Sir,
could spare any
could
food,
I
I'd be very
could
grateful.
I have your
Please sit
leftovers?
down. You can have this.
The voice was
Thank
small,
you.
a thread pulled taut, ready to snap. Malik Carter looked up from the glow of his phone, where a cascade of emails competed for his attention under the soft lighting of Belafonte's, the kind of Seattle restaurant that plated hunger like art and priced it like jewelry. Across the patio rope, a young woman hovered in the wind-stirred halo of the heat lamp. Damp hair tangled at her shoulders, layered clothing the kind you wear when warmth is a puzzle you solve with whatever's clean and close. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed. Cutlery paused midair. A woman in a pearl collar clutched her purse like it was a lifeboat. The waiter's eyebrows arched. Problem detected, problem to be removed. Malik's hand lifted without looking at the waiter. Wait. The woman didn't flinch at his silence. Her eyes, green, glassy, defiant, held his. You have so much food, she said, the shame scouring her throat. I haven't eaten in 2 days. I'll take whatever you were done with. Something in her tone, careful, precise, laced the plea with dignity. Not begging, negotiating terms with a world that had already said no. Malik closed his phone. He was tall enough that standing made him a kind of weather. Across from him, the table he never wanted tonight, 2 places set, the second knife too bright, the second wine glass too empty, watched him choose. What's your name? He asked. She blinked as if the question were a trick. Elara, she said, squaring her shoulders like a student answering roll call. Elara Quinn. Elara, he repeated, tasting the vowels. He gathered the still-steaming plates, cacio e pepe curled like silk, osso buco blushing beneath its glaze, roasted carrots lacquered in honey, walked to the rope and handed them over. She reached out with careful hands, not grabbing, not desperate. Careful, like someone used to glassware and experiments, like someone who knew not to jostle. Don't eat out here, Malik added, gesturing to the empty chair opposite him. Come sit. I can't, she whispered, eyes flicking to the hostess stand. They'll kick me out. You're my guest, he said. The line carried a quiet authority he didn't have to sharpen. He'd been taught to wield it by rooms that once pretended he didn't belong. He kept his voice even. They won't say anything. The patio shivered with whispers. The waiter hesitated, looked at the manager, saw a nod he didn't like, and exhaled through his nose. Alara ducked under the rope, folded herself small, and sat, palms flat against the edge of the table, as though she might levitate it through willpower alone. I know I smell, she said, cheeks burning under the city grit. I tried the library restroom. The dryer ate my quarters. She shut her mouth as if she'd said too much. Malik slid a plate toward her and didn't ask any of the questions people asked to feel better about giving. Where are you from? What did you do? The questions that turned kindness into customs inspection. Eat, he said. We'll talk after. She did. Not ravenous, not animal. Deliberate. Fork and knife at proper angles, wrists steadying themselves against tremors. The pasta vanished. The marrow surrendered. When she reached for the water, her breath hitched, a hiccup of gratitude she tried to strangle. Malik watched the details, the clues. The nails trimmed but not chewed. A tiny crescent scar at the base of her thumb, the kind lab goggles or pipettes sometimes leave. Beneath the grime, the hint of orthodontic work that once cost someone something. He built profiles for a living. His company modeled risk where other people saw noise. Thank you, she said finally, voice raw. You have no idea. I might, he said softly. Where do you sleep? She flinched. Why? Because I'm going to follow you in silence, he said, as if ordering dessert. Or walk with you if you'd rather. That's weird. Wariness sparked behind the gratitude. It is, he admitted, but I want to see how you live, not to fix you, to understand. And if I say no, I'll follow from far enough away to make you feel safe. Why? She pressed, folding her arms now, testing the edges of this stranger in a suit. He thought of the dozen times a maitre d' scanned past him to the white intern at his side, the way security trailed him through boutiques like guilt with a name tag. He thought of the first check someone wrote him, and the day after, when another person asked who he was delivering for. Because you asked for leftovers with more grace than some founders asked for 8 figures, he said. Because once, someone chose to see me. and I'd rather see than look through. She studied him openly now. The dark skin. The fade cut his barber perfected every second Thursday. The watch he never mentioned. The cuff links his grandmother polished before her Sunday choir. Okay, she said at last. Follow. But my life isn't pretty. Neither is the world, he answered. We just package it differently. She led him out into a Seattle evening, salted with sea air and bus exhaust. He walked 3 steps behind, keeping distance without theatricality. Downtown glow surrendered to blocks where streetlights hummed, but didn't always work. Ilara paused at a dumpster, palmed a hidden sleeping bag with practiced discretion, nodded to a woman in a knit cap who narrowed her eyes at Malik until Ilara shook her head. It's fine. After 20 minutes, they slipped beneath the growl of I-5 to a square of space Ilara had choreographed out of debris and refusal. Tarp, cardboard, a plastic crate shyly claiming the job of a table, and there, taped to the concrete, photos that didn't belong to this life. A girl in a white coat, goggles poised at her brow, a commencement cap angled on the same head, the same green eyes blazing clean and proud. On the crate, 3 books, their spines a thesis defense, statistical mechanics, differential equations, structural biochemistry, stacked with the care you give to fragile things that prove who you once were. This is it, she said, my palace. You're a scientist, he said. It wasn't a question, more like a recognition. Was, she corrected, then after a beat, PhD in biochemistry, UW undergrad, Stanford for the doctorate, postdoc pipeline into a pharma job. And then my mother got sick. Stage 4 doesn't care about your citations. Her laugh tasted like rust. I took time off. They said it was fine. Budget cuts said otherwise. Insurance called the only treatment that gave her 3 good months experimental. Debt became a person who moved in without paying rent. I lost the apartment. Do you know how small you can fold a life? Turns out, very. Ehe. How long? He asked quietly. 8 months, she said. I learned which churches serve real meals, which libraries won't call security, which alleys keep the rain out. I learned shame has muscle memory, and that people think homelessness is a personality trait. You didn't lose your mind, he said. You lost your address. She closed her eyes like the sentence surprised her. Some days, both, she breathed. Malik sat on the curb, the concrete taking his suit's measure and deciding it would scuff. He didn't flinch. My turn, he said. I'm Malik. I run Halcyon Stratagem, cyber risk modeling, quantum-resistant architecture, the boring stuff that keeps banks from crying on cable news. 37, grew up in Rainier Beach. My mother put a no-nonsense into me that encryption can't crack. And if you're measuring worth, he added, tipping his head, the world tends to check my skin before my balance sheet. He told her the short-handed version. The pitches where the receptionist looked for his boss behind him. The introductions where VPs held his hand too long. The way people hold pets. The night an investor walked past him to the white analyst he mentored and asked if Malek could grab coffee. He left out the part about driving until Lake Washington unspooled the fury, because some truths are better revealed later, when trust has roots. And now, she asked? Now I'm the boss who buys the coffee, he said, a corner of his mouth lifting. And sometimes I forget the boy who ate ramen under a flickering kitchen bulb while his mother taught night school. You reminded me. I'm not a lesson, she said, flint sparking. I know, he said quickly. You're Ilara Quinn, which is why I have an offer that isn't charity. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. I need a brain like yours. Not biochemical, pattern recognition. We're building a lattice to frustrate near-term quantum attacks. I can hire any contractor on a short list I don't respect. Or I can hire the person who read my table like a lab bench and handled cutlery like a pipette. I can set you up with a temporary apartment we use for visiting engineers, clothes that belong in a workplace, and a key card with your name on it at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Salary, healthcare, expectations, no pity, work. Silence pooled. A car thrummed overhead. Someone across the underpass coughed a cough that sounded like history. Why me? She asked finally. Why not the short list you do respect? Because I respect you more, he said simply. Because talent doesn't vanish when life gets feral. Because I'm not offering a handout. I'm offering a runway. You'll have to sprint. And if I fail, then you fail where the espresso's good, he said. But I don't think you will. Her eyes went to the taped-up photo of herself in the lab coat. Something vulnerable crossed her face. Grief around the edges. Pride in the center. I don't want to owe you, she said. I can't be your project. You won't, he said. You'll be my employee. If we do this, you pay me back for the apartment deposit out of your first checks. Not because I need it, because dignity is architecture. She stared at her hands a long time, then lifted her chin. Okay, she said, but if you're lying, if this is some experiment in saviorhood, then you can fire me from your life, he said. Deal? Deal, she said, and offered her hand. It was cool to the touch, steady now. He shook it like it mattered, because it did. Morning smelled like rain rinsed through steel. At 8:45, Alara stood in the lobby of Halcyon's downtown building, backpack zipped, hair damp from sink and paper towel alchemy, hope tucked where fear couldn't find it easily. The receptionist's lashes fluttered when she gave her name. Surprise did the math and decided to keep its mouth shut. Malik arrived with the easy stride of someone at home in glass. Right on time, he said, pleased, and led her past a hallway of framed patents and press clips into a corner office that had been staged overnight by a team that knew how to turn intention into logistics. On the chair, 2 navy slacks, 3 blouses in quiet blues and grays, a soft cardigan, flats in her size. How did he guess? Tags crisp. On the desk, a key card with E. Quinn embossed in white, a slim laptop cradled in foam. In an envelope, a temporary lease, an address 6 blocks away, a single sentence in Malik's hand. This is a bridge, not a leash. Her breath trembled. You did all this since last night? I'm efficient when it matters, he said. Bathroom with a shower is down the hall. Take your time. There's coffee when you're ready. Alara closed the office door and pressed her palms to the desk, as if to feel whether it was real wood or a generous hologram. In the mirror above the credenza, she faced a version of herself she had memorized and misplaced. The shower was a communion. The steam taught her skin the word soft again. She washed her hair twice, combed out the tangles, watched dirt script rivers into the grout, cried like a faucet that needed new washers, and then stopped. Clothes on. The blue blouse made her eyes fierce. The slacks fit like a sentence without apology. She slid the key card into the lanyard and caught her reflection. Alara Quinn, reappearing. Malik waited in a small conference room with drip coffee that tasted like it had a resume. He slid a tablet across the table. Warm up, he said. On the screen, a diagram of a lattice key encapsulation mechanism danced through reduction proofs. A cluster of simulated attacks ticked like impatient metronomes. She read fast, hands steady, brain waking the way a city does. Streetlights off, windows brightening, traffic building, until the model clicked. Your rejection sampler is noisy, she said, more to herself than to him. The bias is small, but at scale it will stack. An adversary might tease correlations if they're patient, or if they can borrow patience from hardware. And here, your Gaussian tail cutoffs. If a timing side channel leaks, it's an invitation. He grinned, the kind of grin a coach saves for a rookie who sees the field in 3 dimensions. Keep going. For 6 hours she did. She forgot the years that had collapsed. She forgot the opinions of diners and the scent of last week's coat. She only remembered the world where symbols conversed like old friends, where problems pretended to be walls, and then opened secret doors if you pressed the pattern. She ate the lunch someone slid in with the reverence of a lab tech swapping cultures. At 6:03, she looked up as if surfacing, and Malik leaned in the doorway with 2 paper bags that smelled like basil and heat. Hungry. Starving, she said, then caught herself. I mean, yes. They ate Thai food at his desk, chopsticks clacking, screensaver casting waves across the wall. They talked algorithms until the chili made them honest enough to step sideways into life. She told him about her mother, how her laugh lived at exactly the pitch between a kettle and a bird, how she'd saved coupons with professor-level rigor, and the way she'd said Alara's name like a thesis defense. He told her about the night his first server cluster overheated and he learned terror can smell like melting plastic and ambition. Somewhere between green curry and jasmine rice, they laughed. Actually laughed. And for the first time in months, Alara heard her own laughter and didn't flinch. "Thank you," she said when they were packing up, the words complicated by all the things they weren't big enough to hold. "For seeing me, for setting rules that feel like respect. You made it easy," he said. "Also," he slid an envelope across the desk. "Don't argue, it's an advance against salary for the apartment deposit. Pay me back when you need to, or don't. But you'll sleep better in a bed." "Oh?" She stared at the envelope, then at him. Everything in her wanted to refuse, to prove a point to a world that wasn't listening. "I'll pay you back," she said at last. "First check." "Good," he said. "Consider it a pact." When she left, the sky had gone the indigo that makes city lights confess. She walked to the address on the lease with a plastic bag of toiletries, a heart speeding like a commuter making the last train, and the strange sensation that the sidewalk was carrying some of her weight for once. The apartment was small, clean, unapologetically temporary. A table that folded if you asked nicely, a couch that planned to be a guest bed on weekends, a bed that believed in second chances. She put her backpack down like an apology to the carpet, opened the window to let in the salt air, and lay on the bed fully clothed, shoes off, eyes open to the city's soft neon. She did not fall asleep so much as be forgiven for staying awake. When morning came, she woke before her alarm because hope doesn't respect snooze buttons. At 8:29, she swiped her keycard. At 8:32, she was elbows deep in a probability distribution that had ideas about itself. At noon, someone from HR handed her a badge lanyard with her photo printed on it, the corners still warm from the machine. In the glass reflection, Ilara touched the plastic, like proof of life. By Friday, she was a rumor at Halcyon that people didn't whisper, "Is that the new contractor?" And then stopped asking because the only question that mattered was, "Did you see her fix that leak?" By the end of week 2, the sampler bias bowed its head and retired of its own accord. The timing side channel packed its bags, and Malik's senior cryptographer came by with a donut and an unforced, "Nice work." On the evening of day 10, Malik appeared in her doorway with takeout and hesitation. "Dinner while we talk next steps?" he asked. She nodded, and they ate among whiteboards that had forgotten shame was a language. "There's a gala next month," he said finally, as if confessing to a small crime. "Black tie. Board donors. Too much talk about blockchains. I usually escape early. Would you come as my guest?" Alara's fork hovered. The word guest did a lot of work for 2 syllables. "You want to bring me into your world," she said carefully. "Not as a project, as someone I like spending time with," he said, looking her straight in the eye. "Someone I respect, someone who has opinions about Gaussian tales in life." A beat. "And yes, as my guest." Fear and something warmer flickered in her chest like a voltage she hadn't touched in a while. "I don't have a dress," she said, a practical wall that hid 1,000 other walls. "I have an assistant who treats problems like rumors. She ends them," he said, smiling. Ilara put her fork down, hands flat against the table again, but this time steady. "Okay," she said, "but I need to pay my way. No more advances. If I go, I'll buy my own." He nodded as if she just solved a lemma. "Deal." Later at home, she took the badge off and held it in 2 hands like a fragile thing that might hatch. Through the window, Seattle blinked its noisy lullaby. She thought about leftovers, about a rope across a patio, about a man who chose to see instead of look. She thought about the photo of herself in a lab coat and wondered if the girl in the picture would recognize the woman standing barefoot in a temporary apartment. Hair still damp from an honest shower. Heart doing calculus it hadn't done in months. The answer came like the solution to an equation you've been circling for hours. Yes. Recognize? Maybe not. Approve? Absolutely. Outside, a bus sighed at the stop and moved on, and a pair of teenagers laughed in a key she hadn't heard in too long. Inside, Alara Quinn slid her badge onto the nightstand, turned out the light, and let the dark be what it was. Quiet, not empty, while the city held its breath for whatever would happen next. Ilara arrived at Halcyon every morning 3 minutes early, as if punctuality could be woven into armor. The week after Malik's invitation, she settled into a rhythm that felt like a life she could trust. She learned how the east windows burned with a soft gold at 8 a.m., how the office veterans tried to hide their awe when a difficult proof folded under her pen, how the cleaning crew whistled the same two songs after 9. She also learned the quiet ways a company reveals its values. People said please to the receptionist. Engineers wrote detailed comments. A junior developer asked Alara for mentorship without flinching at the mismatch between her shiny badge and her unadorned past. Malik made space without ceremony. He showed up with questions that assumed her brain had weight. He asked her to review a vendor proposal, not because she owed him, but because she was qualified. When he walked with her to the espresso machine, he did not angle his shoulders to claim or protect. He simply matched her pace. Respect, Alara realized, rarely announces itself. It just changes the air pressure. 2 Fridays before the gala, HR sent a calendar invite for a benefits briefing. The email's plain language hit her with an ache that felt almost physical. Health insurance, vision, dental. A plan that whispered, "You are not precarious. Not today." She clicked accept and sat still for a moment to let the relief pass through. That afternoon, Malik paused by her whiteboard and tilted his head toward the glassed-in small conference room. He had takeout again, this time from a place where the basil clung to the noodles like stubborn hope. They ate while Alara explained the spectral leakage she had cornered in a simulation. Malik listened, eyes tracking her lines of thought the way you watch a conductor tease a melody from silence. When they drifted from math to life, as they now reliably did, he asked about her mother's books. The ones taped to the underpass wall had been thrifted treasures, often with inscriptions to people whose names Alara never knew, but always wondered about. "Did you ever keep any for yourself?" he asked. She shook her head and looked down at her hands. "I kept a single marginal note," she said finally, "a torn corner with my mother's cursive. She used to write equations like letters to someone she loved. The note said, 'Remember the limiting case when your head refuses.' It is taped inside my wallet. It has survived more rainstorms than I can count." Malik's expression softened. He told her then about a shoebox he kept at the back of his closet, full of spiral notebooks from his first summer of attempting to build Halcyon. He had been 24, working out of a kitchen that doubled as an office, a server rack that doubled as a space heater, nights that doubled as courage. When one investor called him a good kid and sent him a book about management instead of money, he wrote, "No one is coming. Build anyway," across the top page of every notebook. He still opened that shoebox on bad weeks. The gala crept closer. Alara, true to her word, insisted on buying her own dress. Malik's assistant, Nadia, furnished a list of shops that treated customers like people rather than portfolios. Alara found a dress on a quiet Tuesday evening, a simple slip of midnight blue that skimmed without shouting, the fabric holding her like a promise not to betray. She paid with her first paycheck and walked home with the bag cradled against her ribs, not because it was expensive, but because it represented a choice she had reclaimed. The night of the gala unfurled with the particular tension of rooms designed to impress themselves. Ceiling draped with light, tables dressed like dignitaries, murmurs that made more noise than actual conversation. When Malik arrived at her door with a car idling downstairs, his eyes paused. He did not say beautiful first, though he thought it. He said, "You look like yourself," and her breath steadied. At the Four Seasons ballroom, Stairs found them, labeled them, and filed them into the lazy taxonomy of a certain mind. Malik's hand stayed warm at her back. They made the first lap, stopping for introductions that had the careful diction of people who collect power like stamps. Some smiled with genuine curiosity. Some smirked as if kindness was a currency they could counterfeit. When one venture capitalist made a thin joke about Malik rescuing talent from unconventional pipelines, Alara leaned in and said that pipelines are what you build when the world refuses to pave roads. The worst moment came near the bar. A woman in a silver sheath with a smile like frost approached. "Vanessa Tran," Nadia murmured later, a VC whose due diligence extended to people's souls. "So," she said, letting the vowels linger, "you are the Alara we have heard about, the one with the fairy tale. A homeless woman turned quant and the prince who lends her a palace." How encouraging. She lifted her glass in a toast that was anything but. Ilara steadied. Formerly homeless, she said without heat. Scientist before that. Employee now. Partner on certain technical problems. The fairy tale is that a meritocracy exists. I do not tell fairy tales anymore. Vanessa's eyes assessed the return on further cruelty and decided to invest. Careful then, she crooned. Strange how palaces have rules. One infraction and the guards forget your name. Her gaze slid to Malik. We all play this game, Mr. Carter. I do not fault you for yours. Malik's reply was light, almost kind. The difference between us, Vanessa, is that I do not pretend my game is the world, and I do not need to insult my guests to feel taller. His hand found Ilara's. If you will excuse us. They moved to the far side of the room, where a small jazz trio was coaxing a standard into something like solace. Malik exhaled. Ilara's chin was high, but he saw the tremor under it. You handled that with more grace than the room deserved, he said. She smiled without joy. I am tired of being everyone's lesson. Tonight I am just your date. They danced, and the ballroom's noise slid away. In the small circle of movement they made, Ilara felt something click. It was not the dizzy rush of a first kiss or the spectacle of a staged proposal. It was simpler, steadier. It was the sensation of being chosen and choosing. Both. After midnight, they stepped into Seattle's cooler air. Downtown glowed like certainty, pretending to be possibility. On the curb, a couple stared hard at their interlaced hands and then away with the rapidity of people who fear their own staring. Ilara's mouth tightened. Malik squeezed her fingers. Want to walk? He asked. She nodded and they walked the slow loop around the block while the driver waited with patience professionals rent. I love you, he said then. Not rehearsed, not dramatic. Just true. Ilara stopped. The world narrowed to the way his face softened and did not demand an echo. I love you too, she said. And the sentence felt like putting down a weight she had held so long she had forgotten how tired she was. In the weeks that followed, the encryption project sprinted toward an internal deadline. Ilara's models anticipated, deflected, cornered. She wrote documentation the way good teachers write on chalkboards, leaving space for the next mine. When a trade journal asked Halcyon for an expert quote on post-quantum cryptography, Malik sent the request to Ilara, who responded without ornament and made the editor write back with an exclamation point. And then a letter arrived at Ilara's apartment, forwarded through bureaucratic luck. The envelope carried an old logo from her past. Inside, Zenith Biotherapeutics announced itself contrite and opportunistic. Senior research scientist, full benefits, six-figure salary, relocation to Boston. The offer dripped with polished apology. She read it once standing, twice seated, a third time with the paper on the kitchen counter as if it might flatten its intentions. She brought it to Malik that evening, voice even but eyes flicking like a metronome ticking too fast. They want me back, she said. Said they made a mistake. They want me to pack up the last 8 months and pretend they never happened. What do you want? Malik asked, careful not to lean forward as if his desire could tip the scale. I want to never again confuse stability with love, she said. I want to right the wrong that swallowed my life, but not at the cost of the life I am building. I want to be seen for my work and not paraded as a redemption narrative. And I want us. The last words came like a single breath saved for the end. Take time, he said. Not because I am noble, because you deserve a decision that will not wake you at 3 a.m. 5 years from now. She took 3 days. On the 4th, she called Zenith. The voice on the other end was warm and practiced. We value what you bring, Dr. Quinn. When can you start? Ilara asked why now. The silence that followed was an admission wearing a broken mask. When the voice attempted more polish, Ilara interrupted gently. You sent me into a storm without a coat when I stepped away to care for my mother, she said. You called the only treatment that gave her comfort experimental. You declined me because my grief did not generate your kind of value. I want my work to matter inside a system that knows the difference between profit and worth. I decline. She hung up and let the tremor move through her until it was done. Then she went to Malik, knocked, And when he opened, she placed the folded offer letter in his palm like a spent ticket. I chose, she said. I choose you. I choose Halcyon. I choose the version of myself that builds instead of returns. He did not whoop or lift her or make grand promises. He held her face and kissed her once, the kiss of a decision honored. Move in with me, he said later over tea. Not as an emergency, not as rescue, as architecture, as the beginning of a home built on two pillars. She looked at the small apartment that had been a bridge and saw water beneath it that no longer frightened her. Yes, she said, and the yes stitched itself into everything that followed. The new home lived on a tree-lined street in Ballard, where hydrangeas argued cheerfully with picket fences, and neighbors waved with the clean sincerity of people who genuinely borrow sugar. The first night, boxes became tables and blankets became plates, and Alara stood at the kitchen island with a marker in her fist, writing labels for drawers like a cartographer stakes a claim. Malik watched her map spoons and herbs and tea into a domestic topology and felt the quiet joy of a man whose house has discovered its heart. They made rituals quickly and without discussion. Coffee at sunrise near the window that pretended the shipyard cranes were sculpture. Wednesday night phones face down and music loud enough to wash the day. Sunday walks to the farmer's market, where Ilara listened to peaches like a safe cracker, and Malik negotiated for bouquets with math metaphors. They did not curate their joy for anyone. They let it clutter the entryway with the shoes they kicked off and leave fingerprints on the stainless steel. But the world does not cease to be itself because two people are tender. The letters began in month 2, thin envelopes with no return address and blunt opinions about who should love whom. Interracial is an abomination. Stick to your own. He will regret it when the novelty dissolves. She will when the cost arrives. The third envelope contained photos of their front door, their car, red X marks scrawled over glass. Malik's body went cold. He called the precinct. He called Halcyon's security contractor. He called his mother. Alara's first instinct was anger, not fear. For months, the underpass had taught her that courage sometimes looks like refusal. We will not be exiled from our own life, she said. We will make this house brighter. We will invite friends. We will put the porch light on a timer and the kettle on. We will report and protect, and we will not retreat. They installed cameras, upgraded locks, and taught each other new habits. Malik learned to laugh in the face of a knot in his throat when he reached for his keys to dismantle the fortress instinct that told him to sell and run. Ilara learned to text him before she left the office after dark, even when she did not want to narrate her own safety. On nights when anxiety found new ways into their bones, they made tea and read aloud from books that remembered the human race at its best. One afternoon at a grocery store, a confrontation elbowed its way into their day. Ilara turned into the produce aisle, and a woman she had never met planted herself like a verdict. In her 50s, hair set into a style that suggested daily discipline, jaw set as if it resented having to move to make words. I know who you are, she said without preamble. You are the homeless woman he polished into acceptability, the traitor, the one who uses him to climb. Ilara felt the old cold. Then she inhaled once, slow, and stepped into her voice. I am the woman who was homeless because a company valued schedules over love. I am a scientist who solves problems that protect people who will never know my name. I am a wife who chose a man because of his character. Your categories are too small for me, she said. She did not shout. She projected the way you do when you need a back row to hear without echo. The woman hissed something ugly and left in a trail of citrus scent and disapproval. The produce manager, hovering behind a rack of apples, mouthed sorry and handed Ilara a paper bag like tribute. Ilara texted Malik, then stood between the cucumbers and the mangoes and let adrenaline drain until she could hold the bananas without bruising them. That night they sat on the back steps and let the dust gather. I am sorry you have to defend our love to strangers, Malik said. She shook her head. I am sorry the strangers do not understand what they are missing by spending all that breath on hate. Then she leaned into him, and the quiet reached a volume that felt like safety. Employment became permanence. Malik offered Ilara a director title not as a reward for weathering storms, but because the work demanded the weight she could carry. She negotiated salary with a steadiness that would have made her old self proud. She recruited 2 junior analysts with an eye as keen for humility as for intelligence. When Halcyon announced a public-facing research initiative, she suggested a track that opened doors to candidates without tidy resumes. Malik caught her idea, and they built a fellowship program with stipends, housing support, and mentors who knew how to translate between worlds. The groundwork for the foundation emerged one evening at their kitchen table when Alara traced lines on scratch paper while Malik cooked. "What if we could package what I needed and could not find," she said. "Not charity, infrastructure. Short-term housing synced with interviews, micro grants for ID replacement and licensing fees. Small, durable items that restore dignity faster than speeches. A job training program written by people who needed jobs, not by people who needed to write programs." Malik set down the wooden spoon and leaned over the paper. He wrote a name in the margin. "The Eleanor Harris Trust," he said, "to honor the woman who believed in me when no one else brought a chair." Ilara covered his hand with hers. "We will build it," she said. "We will not wait for perfect. We will start and iterate like we do with code." They did. Paperwork, bylaws, a board with voices that were not trophies. They hired Marcus, the veteran Alara had known beneath the overpass, as their first outreach coordinator. He understood in his body the difference between services that perform concern and services that deliver relief. The first month they funded a hotel voucher that kept a mother and 2 children from a shelter line and a spiral of never-ending consequences. The second month they replaced 10 state IDs lost to rain and time. The third month they paid exam fees for a woman who had passed her bus driver's certification course twice, but could not afford the test a third time. Each small victory landed like a nail in a bridge they were building across a gorge. In public, their story drew both cheers and bile. A podcast host courted Alara with an angle that made her stomach turn. "The redemption arc writes itself," he said brightly. "We will shoot B-roll under an overpass and use it as a metaphor." She declined. The only metaphor she wanted was a key in a lock and a person stepping inside. Before their first foundation gala, smaller and softer than Halcyon's, Malik's mother called. Diana Carter's voice held the warm authority of a woman who could orchestrate a church supper for 100 without breaking a sweat. "Son," she said, "I worried when you told me who you loved, not because I could not love her, but because I know the weight of the world. Watching you two carry it together has eased that worry. I am proud of the woman you chose, and proud of the man you are with her." After the call, Malik told Alara, and she cried for the long stretch of her life, in which approval from a mother had been a rare and precious brief. They put Diana at the foundation gala's head table. She clapped for every small number Alara recited as if they were gold medals. Near the end of the evening, Riley walked in. Early 20s, shoes thin at the heels, eyes too old for the bones behind them. She did not approach the donation desk. She went straight to Alara because there are certain faces you never forget when you have had to ask strangers for help. "I heard you help people who know how to work," Riley said, voice barely audible over the small band's soft song. "I need a shower and an interview and a pause in this exhaustion." Alara guided her to a side room where quiet replaced soundtrack. She listened for 40 minutes, asked gentle questions that did not turn into tests, and then began. "We will get you a room for 2 weeks," she said. "Not a shelter, a lockable door. We will get you a day labor shift tomorrow so your first pocket money arrives before noon. We will walk next to you through the application system so it does not eat you alive. And on Tuesday, if you want, you can sit with me at Halcyon for an hour, and we will practice telling your story in a way that opens doors without making you bleed in public." Riley's shoulders dropped half an inch, the precise measure of hope. "Thank you," she said, already bracing in case the world snatched it back. Alara nodded. "We will not let the world do that this week, and next week we will negotiate again." At home that night, Malik handed Alara a sealed envelope with a small smile. "An early anniversary present," he said. Inside, incorporation papers, bank accounts, and a matching pledge. He had already funded the Eleanor Harris Trust to survive a year if every donor vanished. Alara pressed the papers to her chest, then Malik to her chest. "You keep turning kindness into logistics," she whispered. "That is your superpower." He laughed and told her hers was turning logistics into dignity. Their marriage was not a story without friction. They learned how to argue in paragraphs rather than accusations. Ilara sometimes withdrew into silence when an old shame flared, and Malik sometimes mistook her silence for disapproval because old rooms taught him absence quickly. They built a rule. When the past reaches into the present, we name it out loud, not to win, but to keep us from fighting ghosts. It worked often enough to be called wisdom. On a night when rain penciled the windows and thunder rehearsed, Ilara stood in the kitchen in socks and practiced for the Foundation's first press interview. She hated cameras but loved the chance to point them at the right frame. Malik leaned in the doorway and watched. "When you speak," he said, "you make people want to revise their definitions of possible." She laughed and the sound stitched the evening shut. On their second anniversary, they returned to Belafonte's the way pilgrims return to a spring. The patio rope now seemed thinner, the staff warmer, the waiter older by 1,000 small kindnesses. The same table waited, as if the wood remembered the weight of a decision. Lara touched the chair across from her and felt her past self standing in the alley outside, asking a stranger for the pieces of a meal. "To leftovers," Malik said, lifting a glass. "To asking and being asked," Lara replied, smiling. Dinner arrived like an encore. The osso buco was as tender as memory. Ilara did not eat like a person starved. She ate like a person who trusts tomorrow. After dessert, Malik slid a folder across the table. "No spectacle," he said, "just a roadmap. Inside, a 10-page plan for the Foundation's next arm. A scholarship for people whose resumes would be laughed at by automated filters, pairing vocational training with small but strategically placed grants." The final page listed a pilot cohort of 5 names. Riley sat at the top. Ilara's eyes went glassy. "Do you ever tire of turning good ideas into calendars and budgets?" she asked. He shook his head. "Do you ever tire of turning pain into policy?" he replied. They laughed and promised each other to rest before the next sprint. The next morning, the news cycle found them again. A national outlet ran a piece headlined with all the words Ilara disliked, packaging their life in a shape that made it easier to sell. The comments swelled up like a bruise. She did not read past the first dozen, but one found its way through anyway. "She is a grifter, elevating herself on the back of a narrative. He is a man with a fetish for rescue." That evening, they sat with tea in the living room, while the dog they had recently adopted crushed a squeaky toy into silence. Malik asked if she wanted him to call the editor. "No," she said. "Let the work answer. Let people like Riley answer. Let the scholarship recipients answer. If the noise gets too loud, we will go somewhere quiet and remind ourselves which voices matter." He nodded, relieved. He had wanted to fight, but sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is not swing. When the letters returned for a brief, ugly week, the police finally traced the sender to a neighbor 3 blocks away, a man with too much time and too little purpose. The restraining order was clean and unequivocal. Malik's stomach let go of a knot he did not realize he had been carrying since childhood. Ilara baked a pie and brought it to the precinct with a thank you note, written in the neat hand of someone who knows that public servants are humans, not vending machines. Work pressed forward. Halcyon announced a partnership with a bank too large to fail and too proud to admit it needed help. Ilara led the technical brief with a poise that made the bank's chief security officer recalibrate the room's center of gravity. In the Q&A, a senior executive asked the question that reveals more about the asker than the subject. "How do we know your solution will stand up when the future arrives faster than forecast?" Ilara smiled. "We don't," she said. "That is why we invent while we defend. That is why we design for failure with the same attention we give to success. That is why you hire people who have already survived an accelerated future." The room went quiet the way a room goes quiet when it recognizes truth, even if it does not applaud it. The fellowship program graduated its first class. 3 fellows accepted offers within Halcyon. 2 chose other companies. Each told a story about the first day they swiped a key card and felt the lock give. At the celebration, Ilara spoke without trembling. She told them that a badge is a tool, not a virtue, and a paycheck is a platform, not a personality. She told them to treat the receptionist like an oracle and the janitor like a consultant. She told them to pronounce their own names first. At home, life unfolded in the small delights that do not trend. Malik burned pancakes twice and then learned the heat his grandmother had advised for decades. Ilara planted basil and learned that a plant can teach patience better than any app. They fixed a leak together without cursing and high-fived like plumbers who had just won a championship. When a storm knocked the power out, they ate ice cream on the floor with spoons. And when the lights winked back, they did not immediately stand up. On a Saturday morning, they visited the underpass. Not because nostalgia required suffering, but because gratitude sometimes likes a specific address. The tarps were mostly gone, replaced temporarily by city crews and promises, but a small pocket of space remained where the damp still smelled like failed intentions. Ilara set down a bouquet and a laminated copy of her mother's marginal note that had lived in her wallet almost to illegibility. A man with a cart shuffled by and glanced at the paper. "What does it say?" he asked, curious rather than suspicious. "Remember the limiting case when your head refuses," Ilara read aloud. The man nodded. Then he pointed at Malik. "And you. What do you remember?" Malik smiled. "No one is coming. Build anyway." The man grinned then, a quick flash, and pressed two warm donuts into their hands like communion. On the way back to the car, Ilara laughed with her whole chest for the first time that week. The Trust's first annual report was modest and beautiful. It did not boast, it counted. 103 nights of safe sleep, 36 identification documents replaced, 12 training cohorts funded, 218 bus passes, 509 meals handed over without a sermon. The last page listed names of donors who had given $10 and names of donors who had given $10,000, typeset without hierarchy. At the bottom, a single sentence. "We do not rescue. We redistribute momentum." The evening the report went live, Riley texted Ilara a photo of her new work badge and a short message. "I asked for leftovers. You handed me a pantry." Ilara stood at the kitchen sink and cried quietly while Malik dried a plate and pretended not to notice for exactly the amount of time it takes to let a person keep their dignity. Then he turned and took her dripping hands in his and pressed her palms to his chest. "You did that," he said. "We did that," she corrected. Then she laughed because redistribution of credit had become reflex. That night they sat on the back steps again, summer's long light making it easy to believe in abundance. The dog hunted nothing in particular across the yard, with the determination of a small god. Malik leaned his head on Ilara's shoulder. "Do you ever think about the first night?" he asked. "The rope, the whisper, the choice." "Every time we put leftovers in a container," she said. "And every time someone asks at a party how we met, and I refuse to make it palatable. I tell them the truth. I asked for what I needed. You listened. We followed each other to a life." He kissed her hair. The city hummed. Somewhere, someone asked a stranger for help and braced for the worst. Somewhere, someone else lifted a hand, not in warning, but in welcome. On their porch, two people who had once been invisible and misjudged and underestimated in different currencies held hands and let the evening do what evenings do when they are not interrupted by sirens or dread. They softened. Before bed, Ilara slipped her fingers into her wallet and touched the half-faded piece of paper with her mother's script. "Remember the limiting case when your head refuses." She smiled. The limiting case of love, she thought, is not the grand gesture, not the viral story, not the forgiveness that erases harm without repair. The limiting case is the daily decision to build a home where dignity is the default and kindness is infrastructure. She slid the paper back and turned off the lamp. In the dark, Malik's voice came soft. "Say it again," he murmured. "The phrase your mother wrote." She did. Then she added the one he had shown her. "No one is coming. Build anyway." He laughed under his breath. "We built," he said. "We keep building." She reached for his hand. "We keep building," she echoed. They slept, not like people who have outrun sorrow forever, but like people who know where to put it when it returns. Outside, the hydrangeas exhaled. The cameras blinked their patient blink. The Foundation's small database hummed with names that would become stories, and the city turned one click closer to morning.